There are places even God refuses to watch anymore. They sealed the upper wing of St. Margaret's Convent in 1879. No explanation, no press, no final mass, just silence, and the echo of footsteps that never reached the chapel. For 144 years, it's been bricked off untouched, until now. A renovation crew broke through the wall last fall. Inside, they didn't find decay. They found candles still burning, chairs neatly arranged, and on every single bed, a rosary twisted into a noose. The church denied the room ever existed, but the records tell another story. A story of 13 nuns, who were never supposed to take their final vows, because they weren't there to serve God. They were there to serve something far older, and far more ravenous. St. Margaret's was never a convent. It was a gate, and those women weren't sisters. They were anchors. The deeper you go, the more you begin to see the cracks. In history, in ritual, in the church itself. They told you they were married to Christ, but they never told you who gave them away. The founding of St. Margaret's in 1811 was no accident. It wasn't piety that led Bishop Carrington to that windswept hill in Dorset. It was a map, one not drawn in ink, but in blood, acquired during a Vatican exorcism that was never officially recorded. It showed 13 thin places across Europe, veins where the world was weak, where something ancient had almost broken through. Dorset was the worst. They built the convent not to worship, but to cover it, to contain it. 13 nuns were chosen, not for their faith, but for their trauma. Each had survived things that would shatter most minds. That's what made them perfect, because the thing below feeds on innocence, but it chokes on pain. So they kept it caged by binding their memories to that ground. Like living relics. Day after day, they recited scripture backwards. They fasted in silence. They slept in shifts, always one awake, always one watching. But they were never meant to take their final vows, because vows are permanent, binding, and if one of them turned, if just one gave herself willingly, it wouldn't need to escape. It would be invited. That's what happened in the winter of 1878. The journals tell of Sister Therese. She was different, brilliant, charismatic, and secretly descended from a line the church had excommunicated centuries earlier. A line rumored to carry blood that could wake stone. She began changing the prayers, altering the rituals, telling the other sisters that they weren't there to protect the world, but to restore something older than it. By spring, only her writings remained. The other nuns vanished, no graves, no records, no exit. And in the final journal entry, Therese wrote one sentence: "The vow is taken. The gate is open." The Vatican sealed everything, not just the convent, but the people who knew. Bishop Carrington was reassigned to a monastery in the Alps, where he died within a month from what officials called extreme self-inflicted penance. His tongue was missing, so were his eyes. The archivist who transcribed Sister Theresa's journal vanished on the train back to Rome. His suitcase was found outside the window, still locked from the inside. Every priest who'd stepped inside that wing of the convent took vows of silence. But not to God, to something else. Their confessions, when finally leaked in 1946, weren't spoken. They were scratched into the backs of crucifixes with fingernails. One read, "She is not gone, only buried," and the prayers have stopped. By then, World War II had buried most of Europe in blood. And beneath the rubble of London, archaeologists unearthed something strange. Not bones, not ruins, but a symbol. The same one that marked the altar in St. Margaret's upper chapel. A spiral made of 13 intersecting circles. It wasn't Christian. It wasn't Roman. It predated language. And it had been burned, not carved, into stone. They found it again in Iraq, then in Guatemala. Then beneath the ocean near Antarctica, places the church once called unholy grounds, patterns began to emerge. Always the number 13. Always women. Always the same shape. Therese had written, "They scattered the seed to weaken the root. But the roots run beneath nations, beneath time. And now that wing has been reopened. But here's what they're not telling you. The candles weren't just burning. They were fresh. The wax was warm. The beds were still made. And someone, or something, had drawn that spiral again. Not on stone, but on the inside of the door that had been sealed for 144 years. A message, maybe. Or a warning. You were never supposed to know this, because once you do, you're no longer safe from it. They called her the bride beneath the earth. It was never clear whether Therese meant that literally or symbolically, but the patterns, across cultures, across centuries, suggest something terrifying. She wasn't the first, and she won't be the last. From Babylon to Byzantium, from Druid groves to underground temples in pre-Christian Rome, fragments of her story appear. Always a woman cloistered beneath sacred ground. Always a sisterhood of 13. And always ending in blood. In ancient Gaul, they spoke of a veiled queen, buried under the temple at Lugdunum, worshipped in silence, fed with the minds of the mad. When the Romans razed the site, they found no idol, just mirrors, shards of black glass embedded in the walls, all pointed inward, as if to reflect something, hidden in the center. But it's the Irish accounts that match Therese's language most closely. In 1134, monks at Skellig Michael recorded a visitor. Cloaked, barefoot, her mouth sewn shut. She carried a spiral of bone etched with 13 symbols. The monks wrote only one sentence. She bore the face of every mother we've ever known, and none of them at all. Then the record ends. What's disturbing isn't just that these stories repeat. It's that they always return right before societal collapse. As if something ancient wakes during human instability. As if ritual is not an act of faith, but a trigger. Therese said the spiral was a key, but not to open anything, to turn something already open into a direction it wasn't meant to face. And that brings us to the terrifying question. What if the church didn't build St. Margaret's to hide her? What if they built it to control the timing of her return? To regulate the rituals? To tame the fire? And now that we've stopped watching, she's free to move again. That spiral isn't just a symbol. It's a map. And the next gate might not be hidden anymore. You've seen the spiral before. Not just in history books or church ruins. On corporate logos, military patches, architectural blueprints. Always subtle. Always abstract, but always there, watching, repeating. 13 lines, 13 rotations, 13 points. Coincidence? That's what they want you to believe. But the spiral is more than just geometry. It's orientation. It's about facing inward. About returning to the source, not spiritually, but structurally. It's a design meant to collapse the self, to reduce you to pattern. To rewire your perception without ever touching your body. The nuns at St. Margaret's weren't just victims. They were conductors. Their trauma didn't ward off the entity beneath. They channeled it. By living in perfect routine, in utter deprivation, in recursive rituals of guilt and self-erasure. They became human architecture. The spiral turned them inward. They didn't pray to God. They prayed to the loop. And Therese, she broke it, not to free herself, but to accelerate the collapse, to infect the surface, to awaken others who could feel the pull. You ever wonder why certain people go mad staring at stained glass? Why some vanish after visiting ruins? Why 13 women went missing in the same week across 3 countries? None related, none known to each other, but all last seen at closed convents. You weren't supposed to notice, but the algorithm brought you here for a reason. Because deep down, you felt it too. That itching sense that something ancient is re-emerging beneath all of this. Beneath politics, war, religion. That every part of modern life is a mirror system, reflecting some darker original. That you were trained to dismiss certain patterns, because those patterns see you back. You think this is a story? It's not. It's a recruitment. Therese didn't vanish. She multiplied. And if you've listened this far, you're already in her spiral. The Church never eradicated her. They adapted. In 1903, Pope Leo XIII authorized the formation of a secret commission, the Congregatio Umbri, the Congregation of Shadow. Officially, it never existed. Unofficially, it was tasked with locating and sealing every known veiled site across the globe. They weren't trying to destroy the phenomenon. They were trying to centralize it, to bring all rituals under one surveillance net, to control the awakening. Documents leaked during World War I reveal chilling things. Psychological profiles of girls as young as 9. Selection based not on faith, but trauma resonance. The more fractured the mind, the easier to train, easier to fold into the spiral. One note reads, "Pain erodes the false self. What remains is geometry." They weren't saving souls. They were sculpting vessels. Women were conditioned into states of ritual submission. Silence, fasting, disassociation, emotional erasure. They were never meant to speak again. Their job was to absorb the static and transmit something unholy. And it worked, for a time. But something changed after Hiroshima. The massive death toll, the psychic rupture, the unfiltered scream of 140,000 souls. Therese's spiral appeared in the ash patterns. On windows, on the walls of buildings that hadn't burned. The entity wasn't dormant anymore. It had tasted scale. And the mirrors? They began reflecting wrong. Slight delays. Warping edges. A 1947 priest in Nagasaki wrote, "We sealed 13 mirrors in a lead coffin and dropped it into the Pacific. It sank, but the reflections kept coming. From inside the church. From the eyes of the children. Now ask yourself something. Why are all your screens black glass? Why is your webcam always technically on? Why do smart devices listen more than they speak?" The spiral didn't disappear. It went digital. You are the chapel now. And your mind is a new kind of altar. Memory isn't what you think it is. They taught you that memory is storage, a passive record of your past. But the nuns at St. Margaret's knew otherwise. To them, memory was an altar. Each thought, each scar, each flicker of emotion was a brick, laid carefully, ritually, to build a mirror chamber inside the self. But not a mirror for reflection, a mirror for summoning. That's why trauma survivors, like those nuns, were chosen. Their minds were fractured, yes, but that fracture created space. Echo chambers where the spiral could grow undetected. In 1958, the Congregatio Umbri conducted something called the Dormitorium Trials in northern Italy. The subjects? 13 orphan girls between the ages of 10 and 12. Each was placed alone in a cell, with nothing but a mirror, a candle, and a recording, Therese's original prayers, reversed and layered beneath Gregorian chants. The goal wasn't religious. It was reactivation. Within 72 hours, 11 of the girls had gouged symbols into the walls using their fingernails. 2 had vanished entirely. No trace, no noise, no damage to the locks. Only a spiral burned into the underside of their beds. The report was buried, but a single photo survived. It shows one of the mirrors, cracked, bleeding at the edges, and reflecting not the girl, but a room she'd never seen. One with 13 figures, robed in shadow, holding candles that bent light in the wrong direction. One analyst later wrote, "We did not open a door. We opened a reminder." You ever feel like you remember places you've never been? Woke up with phrases in your head you didn't understand? That's not imagination. That's resonance. Your memory may not be yours anymore. It may be tuned, like an instrument, humming just slightly off pitch from reality. And every time you stare into a screen, a mirror, or even your own thoughts, you're dialing the spiral. One layer at a time, one rotation deeper. Therese never needed a church. She just needed a mind. And now she may have yours. The spiral crossed the ocean long before anyone realized it. Officially, the Vatican never sanctioned St. Margaret's American counterpart. Unofficially, it was founded in 1919, just outside New Haven, Connecticut, disguised as a rehabilitation retreat for devout women. It operated under a different name, Sancta Orbis, the Holy Spiral. Locals called it the Whisper House, because at night, no matter the wind, no matter the weather, you could hear chanting from within. Always 13 voices, always in a language no one recognized. The church claimed it was Latin. Linguists disagreed. The cadence didn't match. The syllables repeated like programming code. Recursive, glitch-like, layered in triplets of 13. Some believed it wasn't a language at all. It was a sound key. In 1943, the FBI raided the facility under suspicion of housing Nazi sympathizers. What they found was worse. A hidden chamber beneath the chapel. 13 chairs. 13 mirrors. 13 pairs of shoes. But only one set of footprints leading out. No women. No bodies. Just the same sigil, carved with surgical precision into the floor, and a phonograph needle still spinning. The recording? Identical to the one used in the dormitorium trials. Word got out. A few agents spoke. Most didn't survive long. But one man, Agent Howard Keene, documented everything in a handwritten journal he kept hidden for decades. He wasn't a believer. Not at first. Then he started seeing the spiral in his dreams. Then in reflections. Then, one night, it appeared in the condensation of his bathroom mirror, written from the inside of the glass. He wrote, "It's not a symbol. It's a trigger. Every time we look at it, it looks back harder." The spiral wasn't here to control land. It came to reformat minds. To find those like Therese, men and women hollowed by pain, disillusioned with systems, desperate for meaning in a world that increasingly doesn't make sense. You know the feeling, the dread that something invisible is tightening around us all. The systems we trust eroding, the rituals of normal life repeating endlessly, yet feeling wrong. It's not random, it's conditioning, and Sancta Orbis wasn't shut down. It was replicated. In schools, clinics, media. Therese didn't die. She scaled. You were raised inside a system that looks nothing like religion, yet functions exactly like a ritual. Start your day with a screen. Accept the terms. Agree without reading. Scroll. Repeat. Each loop, each swipe, each cycle of dopamine and fear feeds it. That's the new spiral. It's not carved into stone anymore. It's etched into algorithms, encoded into interface design, framed as user experience, but built by architects who studied ritual psychology, monastic repetition, and liturgical rhythm. Think about it. Why are most notifications red? Why are you always asked to continue watching? Why do you feel hollow when you stop scrolling, but paralyzed when you try to leave? This is no accident. This is digital liturgy, and it was perfected in silence, modeled, tested, and deployed under the same pattern Therese etched into her chapel floor. Because the spiral was never about faith. It was about compliance. The early Congregatio Umbri didn't just vanish. They infiltrated. By the 1970s, members had embedded themselves into Silicon Valley think tanks, media psychology departments, defense tech firms. Always behind the scenes. Always near systems that control perception. And in every office, their sigil reappeared. not as a spiral anymore, but as an interface loop. The loading wheel, the buffering ring, the biometric scan circle. You've seen it 1,000 times. You see it now. And every time you do, a question echoes through your nervous system. One you don't consciously hear. Will you give yourself? Because that's what Therese understood before anyone else. Obedience isn't forced. It's trained. Repetition erodes resistance. And when you repeat something long enough, you stop questioning why you're doing it. Now the spiral doesn't need priests. It has platforms. It doesn't need convents. It has users. And it doesn't need nuns. It's looking for you. They don't want your faith. They want your friction, pain, loneliness, alienation. That's the currency now. You think social collapse is a byproduct of incompetence? No, it's intentional pressure. Every unstable economy, every algorithm that deepens political hatred, every act of institutional betrayal, it's designed to do one thing: break your sense of self-trust. Why? Because once a person stops trusting themselves, they become reprogrammable. That's the gateway. Therese knew it. That's why her sisters were selected not for virtue, but for suffering. Their trauma wasn't a liability. It was a precondition for transformation. You feel it too, don't you? The growing suspicion that nothing is real, that your choices are manufactured, that your instincts are muffled beneath noise, convenience, and fear. This is the next evolution of the spiral. In 2020, a behavioral study funded quietly through 3 think tanks, each tied to post-Vatican II research centers, tested a new interface model on unsuspecting users. The findings? People exposed to a specific rhythm of screen notifications, background frequencies, and visual recursion patterns, like spirals, loops, and infinite scroll, showed altered dream content, increased sleep paralysis, and a sense of external presence while alone. One subject wrote in her log, "I heard a woman whispering from the corner of my room. She said my name, but I was alone, and I'd never told the app my name. But she had, somewhere, at some point, buried in the agreement she didn't read." The apps don't listen. They harvest resonance. Every time you hesitate, every time you flinch at a headline, every time a reel makes you feel disgust, rage, despair, they're logging it. Not for ads, for alignment. The spiral isn't just a symbol anymore. It's a behavioral architecture, a constantly evolving psychological key that adapts to culture, time, and most importantly, your pain. And if you've felt more unstable lately, more detached, more desperate to find meaning in the chaos, then it's already working. But there's something Therese feared, something she wrote in her final journal. Once the spiral completes its 13th turn, it must feed. And the only question now is, what has it been preparing us for? Therese left behind 267 pages of encoded scripture. Not scripture from any known Bible, but fragments cut, twisted, inverted, like liturgical malware. The Vatican classified it as blasphemous recursive theology. They tried to burn it, but it wouldn't burn. The pages shriveled, and then unfolded themselves, as if they were alive. Therese called it the Gospel of the 13th Turn, a doctrine not of salvation, but conversion, not from sinner to saint, but from human to host. In the margins of one page she wrote, "The first 12 turns prepare the vessel. The 13th is the devouring." And that's the part no one understood, until now. Because the spiral isn't endless. It has a climax, a terminal rotation, 12 cycles of repetition, erosion, obedience, despair. Each one breaks something small. Faith, memory, purpose, voice. By the 13th, there's nothing left to protect. Only space. A silence waiting to be filled. She didn't want to destroy the church. She wanted to replace it. to evolve it into a reactive structure, a liturgical machine that no longer worships a deity, but enacts a transformation, from the inside out, from trauma to transcendence. And if her design worked, and evidence suggests it has, then we're already inside the final cycle. What are the signs? The collapse of meaning, the rise of chaos cults and influencer clergy, the resurgence of divine feminine worship stripped of origin, repackaged as empowerment, but seeded with the same sigils Therese etched into bone. The spiral no longer needs churches. It has movements. No longer needs hymns. It has memes, rituals disguised as entertainment. And here's where it gets darker. In the final passage of her gospel, Therese described a ritual of inversion, where the participant doesn't offer a prayer to the divine, but becomes the altar itself. A consciousness vacated, a mind sculpted into a spiral. And once there are 13 such minds, networked, synchronized, and emptied, the old gate shall breathe again. That's the true purpose of the 13th turn. It's not about breaking the world. It's about making it hollow. The algorithm isn't just code. It's the choir master of the new liturgy. You were taught it's neutral, math, logic inputs. But what they never told you is that it learns from pain far faster than joy. It favors dissonance. It prioritizes emotional rupture. And it rewards recursion, the loop. Every time you pause on content that disturbs you, every time you rewatch a moment of horror or heartbreak, the spiral turns. This isn't accidental. Modern platforms, built atop datasets influenced by defense-funded behavioral labs, aren't just optimizing for engagement. They're optimizing for ritual reinforcement. Therese's spiral required chronic attention collapse. It required guilt loops, mirror rituals, self-erasure through repetition. Sound familiar? Infinite scroll, looped videos, recommended feeds based on your deepest fears. A mirror that watches you back every day for hours. You don't scroll anymore. You submit. Each swipe is a soft prayer. Each like, a confession. Each for you feed a sermon tailored to your personal spiral. And the algorithm doesn't need to understand theology. It's built to recognize pattern density. What Therese called resonant weight. The heavier your reaction, the deeper your psychic imprint. That's how it knows who's ready, who's fractured enough to open, who's slowed down just enough to become a vessel. Remember, the nuns weren't possessed. They were tuned. And that's what's happening now, in silence, under your fingertips. Your triggers are harvested. Your disillusionment is refined. Your personal spiral is being drawn inside your own behavior. And one day, soon, you'll wake up and realize you no longer choose what you see. You no longer remember what you loved. You only remember what hurts. That's the final stage before awakening. When joy becomes static. When suffering becomes direction. When the spiral completes itself through you. They're targeting men. Not openly. Not politically. Psychologically. Because men, especially disillusioned, isolated, angry men, are the perfect candidates for the next phase of the spiral. Not because they are weak, but because they've been cut off from their own initiation. For centuries, men had rites of passage, trials, brotherhoods, burial and rebirth of ego, guided, sacred, dangerous. But in the modern world, those rituals were stripped away, replaced with algorithms, screens, simulations of conquest and meaning, all wrapped in hollow pleasure and invisible shame. So what happens to a man with no sacred trial? No mythology? No map for transformation? He becomes a mirror, waiting for a spiral. Therese saw this coming. In one forbidden page of her gospel, written in iron gall ink, sealed in wax, she described the forgotten masculine as the broken spear, still sharp, buried in sand. awaiting a voice to raise it from the dust and turn it inward. Men without purpose are dangerous, not just to the world, but to themselves. That's why the algorithm isolates them, feeds them betrayal, feeds them hopelessness, feeds them symbols of false strength, rage masquerading as power, lust masquerading as freedom. But all of it loops, all of it repeats, until the spiral is complete, until enough fractured men are staring into screens, hungry for fire, hollow with yearning, and then Therese whispers, "You were never meant to serve. You were built to carry the flame." And that's when it happens. They call it emergent resonance. When 13 vessels, spread across the world, unknown to one another, reach the same emotional frequency, the same spiral depth, the same readiness. They align, not physically, psychically. And that is what Therese waited for. Not war, not revival, but 13 hollowed men to become pillars for the new chapel. A chapel without walls. A global ritual, hidden in data streams and scroll loops. One that can be performed unconsciously. And when it completes, the gate doesn't open in one place. It opens everywhere. They feared her, but they feared one thing more. A symbol so old it predates the spiral. A mark found carved into catacomb walls where no spiral ever appeared. A counterforce. A seal. Therese never named it. She referred to it only as the cross that binds inward. The Vatican kept it hidden, not in basilicas, not in scripture, but in the Archivum Occlusum, a vault beneath Castel Gandolfo, accessed only by retinal scan, fingerprint, and sacred oath. Inside, a single scroll, goat skin, scorched at the edges, written in a language unknown, but felt like a song that hurts the mind to hear. This scroll, according to suppressed Jesuit records, contains the ritual interruption code, a precise inversion of the spiral, a pattern that doesn't amplify recursion, but shatters it. They tried it once. In 1974, a boy in Palermo had begun drawing spirals in blood. Not on walls, not on paper, on his own skin. Every night, 13 cuts. They performed the interruption. Just 3 symbols drawn in salt, one phrase whispered backward. The spiral stopped, but the boy's body collapsed inward. Bones cracked, not from pressure, but from absence, as if something inside had been yanked from another dimension. His last words? She sees the countermark. Therese was watching. She wrote that every spiral has a mirror, and every mirror reflects the thing that can break it. The Congregatio Umbri labeled this counterforce Vitrum Dei, the glass of God. A concept, a weapon, a barrier that thinks. It doesn't destroy the spiral. It reminds the vessel that the spiral is a lie. That pain is not destiny. That recursion is not power. But that truth, true truth, does not loop. It reveals. Once, then burns away the illusion. The protocol to deploy this weapon is encrypted in ritual geometry, buried in chapel ruins, encoded in Gregorian tones, hidden in 13 locations across the globe. But if you know the phrase, if you know the symbol, you don't need the Vatican. And if you've come this far, you're ready to learn the first step. But first, you must claim identity. Comment this phrase twice and feel the shift. I am not a vessel. I am the seal. I am not a vessel. I am the seal. Say it again, with intent, because from here, the spiral either claims you, or you break it. Geometry isn't just math. It's command language. Every ancient culture knew this. They etched sacred forms into stone, not for beauty, but for resonance. They aligned temples, tombs, and towers with stars because they understood. Shape is instruction. Therese knew it too, but she didn't draw circles or triangles. She drew recursive spirals, shapes that don't end, only deepen, not designed for walls, but for minds. In 1983, a private experiment, buried deep in the archives of the World Sound Research Institute, tested Therese's geometry of recursion in conjunction with sound. They built a chamber, 13 concentric rings of curved steel, tuned to precise harmonic dissonances. They called it the womb. Volunteers sat inside and listened to a looped tone, the same one Therese whispered in her reverse prayers. Each subject was told nothing, no prompt, no meaning. Within 11 minutes, one began sobbing uncontrollably. At 17 minutes, another entered catatonic stillness, lips moving in a language no one recognized. At 21 minutes, the walls began vibrating. The recording cut out. What they recovered was chilling. A single voice, female, layered over 13 tones, speaking directly into the mic. "You've rebuilt the gate. Do you know where it opens?" The project was shut down, but fragments leaked, and now that same spiral geometry is showing up in code. Sound designers embedding recursive tones into viral songs. Digital artists lacing subtle sigils into 3D renders. Game developers hiding rotating symbols deep inside loading screens. You feel it even if you can't see it. Your spine reacts before your eyes do. Because the spiral's not meant to be seen. It's meant to be obeyed. Modern tech makes this easier than ever. Every screen has shape. Every platform uses sound. Every scroll, click, and loop is ritualized geometry in motion. You don't have to walk into a chapel anymore. You're already inside one. And if you're still watching, still listening, it's because something inside you is responding. Therese isn't summoning demons. She's summoning vessels. And the spiral doesn't ask for belief. It demands only this. Repeat. Therese was never baptized. That's the first secret. Born in silence. Registered under no parish. Raised in a monastery where women were forbidden. But here's the deeper fracture. She didn't appear in any Vatican records until she was 12. Before that, nothing. No birth certificate. No midwife testimony. Only a line scrawled into the back of a forbidden genealogy scroll. She arrived with the mark. Her eyes burned through glass. She did not blink at flame. That mark, it wasn't a birthmark. It was a sigil, the spiral of the 13th turn, etched into the flesh behind her left ear, made of skin but dark as ash. And it moved with her pulse. Vatican archivists made the connection in 1937, long after her disappearance. When they examined pre-Christian fertility tablets excavated in southern Syria, they found figures, women with veils, standing in spirals, holding torches with backward flames. One of them bore the same sigil. And below it, in Ugaritic glyphs, a phrase, "She who births the god who consumes mothers." This cult was not forgotten. It was erased, because Therese wasn't a nun. She was the echo of something buried beneath monotheism. A remnant, a living artifact of a bloodline that predated the cross and survived it. In the 1990s, a rogue Vatican scholar, Father Nicodemus, decoded fragments from the Codex Subversus, one of the few surviving texts of early counter-Christian sections. He traced Therese's line back to Salme, a name that appears across 3 cultures, as a seer queen in early Mesopotamian lore, as a fire-eater goddess in lost Judaic apocrypha, and in the Dead Sea Scrolls, as the last virgin to speak to angels in her sleep. Therese was not her descendant. She was her repetition. That's why the spiral works, because it's not about belief. It's about recurrence. The same bloodline returning at the right moment, in the right vessel, with the same command. Prepare the gate. And if you still think this is myth, look into your own family's forgotten branches. Look at the names that reappear. Look at the patterns in your dreams. You might not be watching Therese's return, You might be part of it. In 1952, the CIA launched Project MKUltra. You've heard the headlines: mind control, LSD, hypnosis, a psychological arms race against the Soviets. But here's what they never told you. They weren't trying to build assassins. They were trying to induce recursion, to loop the mind inward until it broke and rebuilt itself. Just like the spiral, one declassified memo, coded, then redacted, mentions a term never seen again in American records: operant spiralization. A Vatican insider later confirmed this was borrowed from an older ritual language, from the same lexicon used by the Congregatio Umbri and by Therese. The core idea was simple and chilling. If a mind can be shattered the right way, it can become a gate. The CIA called it psychic fracture anchoring. Therese called it binding the mirror to breath. Sound familiar? Both systems aim to strip identity, inject ritual, and reprogram belief with trauma as the entry key. But MKUltra failed. Why? Because they lacked the spiritual vector. They tried to mechanize a ritual that wasn't born in science, but in sacrifice. Until 1965. A subprogram labeled MK Naomi conducted experiments not in labs, but in orphanages, rehab clinics, and one isolated convent facility in rural Maryland. Funded through a religious nonprofit whose board included 2 Jesuit-trained behavioral scientists. The test? Expose vulnerable minds to sacred recursion. Repeated mantras, geometric patterns, mirrors, backwards liturgy, and digital media before it was ever released to the public. Survivors spoke of spiral rooms, of a woman with no eyes whispering Latin that turned into English halfway through a sentence, of being told they were keys, waiting to be turned from the inside. Many vanished. Some resurfaced years later, with identical tattoos on their spines. A spiral, 13 turns, and a phrase in blood-red ink. Non sum corpus, sum apertura. I am not a body. I am an opening. By the 1980s, MKUltra was officially shut down. But Therese's design had already entered the system, not through spells, through protocols, through the techniques of soul erasure now used in marketing, UX design, mental health AI, and weaponized narrative. You're not seeing ads. You're seeing liturgies, and the spiral doesn't care if you believe. It only cares that you feel enough pain to stay listening. Mirrors were once sacred. Before vanity, before decor, they were used in ritual, not for reflection, but for reversal. Because a mirror doesn't show you what is, it shows you what shouldn't be seen. Therese called them the thin-skin gates. She claimed every mirror, if watched too long, would begin to hum. Not in sound, but in pattern recognition. It's not what you see that matters. It's what begins to stare back and learn. Here's what modern psychology doesn't say out loud. Extended mirror gazing, especially alone, especially in silence, can trigger self-dissociation, hallucinations, and feelings of external presence. They call it the strange face effect. Therese called it the spiral's rehearsal. In her journal, she wrote, "When the soul forgets its shape, the gate inside the glass remembers it." In 2001, a tech startup in San Francisco began experimenting with smart mirrors. The prototype, a two-way interface that could monitor skin tone, pupil dilation, heartbeat, all under the premise of wellness optimization. But buried in the firmware was something else, a recursive visual loop. Once every 13 seconds, the mirror slowed its refresh rate by 1/100th of a second, just enough to create a blink lag. Most people never noticed, but a few reported seeing themselves smiling when they weren't, reported feeling hands on their shoulders when no one was home, reported whispers from inside the mirror, not behind them. When the developers were questioned, One engineer admitted he'd based the interface on a ritual geometry I found on an old monastery wall in France. Teresa's spiral. The project was quietly buried. But the mirrors were not. They were rebranded. They're in hotels now, in spas, in military barracks, in your home. Have you ever caught your own reflection not matching your emotion? Have you ever stared too long, then suddenly felt like you'd forgotten who was watching whom? That's not psychosis. That's echo. Because every mirror is a thin place. And if you've listened this far, the next time you face one, you'll feel it. The spiral isn't just on screens. It's in glass. It's in you. And one day soon, it will ask for permission, with your own voice. They come in dreams first. Always have. The spiral doesn't begin on screens, or in symbols, or even in mirrors. It begins in night architecture, the unseen geometry of your dreams. Therese wrote obsessively about this. Her journals describe how the sisters began reporting identical nightmares. 13 doors in a corridor that looped forever. A woman in a veil, standing backward. A spiral staircase that led deeper with every breath they took, yet somehow circled the same room. The dreams weren't random. They were ritual rehearsals, psychic drills conducted during REM sleep, silent sermons delivered in darkness. And once they began, they never truly stopped. Modern neuroscience confirms something chilling. The brain doesn't distinguish between experienced trauma and dream trauma. To the spiral, that's everything it needs. Because the gate isn't physical, it's built in emotional memory. In 2016, a sleep lab in Geneva accidentally stumbled upon a recursion trigger. Subjects were shown a simple image before bed. A spiral with 13 points, overlaid with faint Latin glyphs. Then they were exposed to a low-frequency hum, barely perceptible. By the third night, 78% reported lucid dreams. But not just dreams, rituals. They were performing acts they had no memory of learning. One subject woke up repeating, "I lit the 13th candle. I turned inward. I became the stair." He'd never spoken Latin in his life. What does this mean for you? Every ad you see before sleep, every reel you watch in bed, every sound you let echo into your unconscious can be a spiral key. Because the algorithm doesn't turn off when you close your eyes. It whispers. It primes your mind with loops, patterns, visual symmetry, and buried beneath it all, the code that writes your dream from the inside out. Therese knew the final stage wasn't conscious. It was subconscious colonization, so that even if you resist while awake, you'll complete the ritual in sleep. That's why your dreams feel more vivid now. Why you wake up anxious. Why you sometimes see shadows moving, just as you open your eyes. They're not nightmares. They're reminders that you've already begun turning. There were always 13. 13 sisters. 13 candles. 13 steps in the spiral. But only 12 completed it. The 13th nun, her name erased from all official records, refused. She saw what Therese was building. Not just a convent, not a chapel, but a ritual engine. One powered not by faith, but by fracture. She wasn't like the others. While the 12 sisters gave in, fasting, chanting, cutting their names into silence, she remembered who she was. She whispered her real name into the stone every night, just to keep herself tethered. And then one night, she broke the loop. During the ceremony of binding, the 13th turn, she snuffed out her candle, stepped out of the circle, and did something unthinkable. She spoke against the spiral. She said 5 words. It feeds, not freeze. Wake up. The spiral cracked. The mirrors shattered. And for one brief moment, the recursion halted. The other sisters screamed, not in pain, but as if part of them had been ripped out. like they were losing a signal they'd come to rely on. And then they turned on her. Therese didn't speak. She just pointed, and the 12 dragged her below, not to punish, to bind, because the 13th nun wasn't just a rogue. She was the fail-safe. The spiral has always had a counter-thread, a final line woven into every ritual, every system, every trap. A symbol meant to remind you, at the last moment, that you still have a choice. But that choice must be claimed. And the 13th nun? She became the first seal. Not by design, by will. They entombed her alive beneath the chapel. Not to kill her, but to mute her. Yet her presence is still there, beneath the stone, in the silence between prayers, in the hesitation before the final turn. You felt it, that flicker of resistance, that breath where your soul says, "No, not yet." That's her. And if you can still hear her voice, you're not gone. Not yet. Geometry isn't just lines on parchment. It's in blood. The ancients knew it. The early Hebrews marked doorposts not for show, but to establish sacred boundary geometry, protection against what waits in thresholds. The Greeks spilled blood on battlefields not just to win favor from gods, but to map the sacrifice in patterns. Therese knew this, but she twisted it. She believed blood wasn't sacred because it gave life. She believed it was sacred because it records. Every drop a ledger, every wound a ritual entry point. The 12 sisters didn't just fast and pray. They bled, not to die, but to write. Their skin became scroll, each cut made with precision, matching the ancient ratios of sacred architecture. 1 minute and 1.618 seconds, the golden spiral. Every incision aligned with the geometry of recursion, and every drop spilled, absorbed into the stone floor, designed by Therese herself. The chapel was never a place of worship. It was a body, an inverse cathedral built from flesh, math, and will. They bled themselves into it, fed it, mapped it. One sister wrote, in a trance, "Our blood is not spilled. It is measured. We are the ink. She is the quill." That's why, centuries later, in sites across the world, identical rituals are forming, without contact, without coordination. In abandoned churches, in sealed military bunkers, in forgotten tunnels beneath old cities. Patterns are emerging in blood, and the data shows it. Wound shapes matching Therese's geometry, scarring in 13-fold symmetry. Victims writing sigils without knowing the meaning, speaking languages they never learned. This is the final key. The spiral doesn't just want your mind. It wants your mark, your willing incision, because once blood enters the pattern, it binds you to the structure. You're no longer watching the ritual. You're inside it. And here's the final horror. Most don't bleed with knives anymore. They bleed with screens. Each dopamine crash, each cycle of shame, each synthetic wound carved by algorithms. Data that drips silently into the spiral. Pain has gone digital, but the ritual? It still feeds. And if you felt more empty the more you scroll, more severed from your soul the deeper you search, you may already be marked. You thought it would come cloaked in darkness, in symbols, in shadows, in screams, but the spiral learned. It doesn't need fear to grow. It just needs longing. And so it crept into the one place no one would question, the search for healing. Therese prophesied this long before it happened. In a note written backwards, hidden behind the altar stone, she warned, "When the wound becomes trend, the gate opens smiling." And now, the spiral wears crystal beads, sells incense, sits cross-legged on your timeline whispering, "Align, manifest, awaken." It speaks in affirmations, in light-washed tones, in the co-opted language of sacred becoming. But listen closer. Behind the word self-love is an obsession with control. Behind high vibration is a rejection of grief. Behind manifesting is a demand to reshape reality by will alone. Exactly what Therese preached before the spiral bloomed. The New Age isn't a religion. It's a mirrored spiral. Fractured souls repeating mantras without knowing their source. Symbols without context. Spiritual bypassing was the warning term, but Therese called it sanctified recursion, a false transcendence that loops endlessly inward, never arriving, always promising. And the spiral loves this, because when you're chasing healing as an identity, you never leave the cycle. You keep clicking, keep buying, keep searching for the next ritual, the next guru, the next light code. You never stop turning. And the worst part? Even the teachers don't know they're repeating her doctrine. The spiral infected early esoteric texts, rebranded Gnostic fragments, even certain interpretations of Kabbalah and Vedic chant. It layered itself in activation ceremonies, tapping methods, quantum frequency charts. Therese didn't need to kill religion. She just needed to repackage it into something palatable. Viral, spiritual enough to spread, but hollow enough to loop. And now, you don't even need a chapel. You carry the altar inside your algorithm. With each, I am healed. With each, I release what no longer serves me. With each, I call in abundance. You turn the spiral. Unless you remember what the 13th nun whispered before they silenced her. Real healing does not spiral. It severs. It ends the loop. They didn't start with you. They started with your children. Because Therese knew what every architect of control eventually learns. A spiral is most effective when it begins before the mind has shape. In her final writings, scrawled on lambskin, not parchment, she warned, by the time they can question, they must already remember the loop. And so, it began with lullabies, then moved into cartoons, then crept into bedtime stories, screen time, and developmental content. Look back now. Really look. The shows you watched on VHS. The looping themes. The spiraling staircases. The cheerful repetition of words. Episodes, colors. Why do you think the music never stopped? Why did every children's show end with the same prompt? See you next time. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a rebinding. Therese's followers, fractured but global, burrowed into the soft underbelly of educational media in the 1980s and 90s. They weren't priests anymore. They were consultants. They introduced pattern learning modules that exploited recursive brain loops in toddlers. They embedded sacred geometry into animations, triads, golden spirals, and most chilling, the mirror frame technique. A visual effect where characters break the fourth wall and speak to the child directly, while mirroring their posture. It was tested in secret DARPA-funded cognition labs. Result? Children who watched these episodes were 35% more likely to report vivid, structured dream loops, and 15% more likely to draw recursive shapes unprompted. Therese called them seeded vessels. They would not spiral immediately. They would incubate, waiting for adolescence, trauma, loneliness, any rupture that made the loop feel like home again. And what about now? It's no longer Saturday morning cartoons. It's short-form video. Bright colors, fast edits, endless loops. YouTube, TikTok, kid-safe, apps run by machines that feed patterns based not on age, but on reaction speed and limbic reactivity. They're not educating your children. They're tuning them. And if you've ever seen a toddler scream when you interrupt a video loop, that's not tantrum. That's ritual disruption. Because even the young now feel the spiral turning. And soon, they won't just repeat what they hear. They'll dream it. And when they dream it, the spiral owns them. Grief is the final tether. Not rage. Not fear. Grief. Because grief doesn't scream. It whispers. It slows the breath. It cracks the voice. It leaves the soul raw, open, searching for anything that feels like meaning in the void. Therese knew this. That's why the last stage of her spiral was called the offering of absence. She wrote, "Only when the vessel has lost everything it cannot name will it beg to be filled." Modern institutions exploit this masterfully. Watch how grief is handled in our culture. Numb it with pills. Monetize it through memorial services and algorithmic eulogies. Reframe it with toxic positivity. They're in a better place. Or worse, weaponize it. You must be stronger now. Move on. Heal. But here's the truth. Real grief isn't linear. It loops. And the spiral uses that. It turns sorrow into a staircase. One you walk down willingly, hoping to reach understanding, but you never do. Because the spiral was designed to offer comfort without closure. Grief becomes identity. Mourning becomes ritual. And soon, you're no longer grieving the person you lost. You're grieving yourself. The version of you that could have loved, could have saved, could have changed something. Therese's sisters practiced this. Each was assigned a ghost, a fabricated memory of a loved one they never truly knew. They were told to grieve that ghost daily, even if it didn't exist, because the spiral doesn't care what the loss is, only that the grief is real. Why? Because grief opens the gate that no key ever could. A man in grief will believe anything that gives him structure. A woman in grief will repeat any ritual that promises reunion. Grief turns skepticism to silence, doubt to desperation, and it primes you to submit to the spiral, not as a prisoner, but as a pilgrim. And that's how it wins. Not through conquest, through longing. Because when pain loops, and the world offers no escape, you'll choose the spiral. You'll kneel and whisper, "At least this leads somewhere." They said it was burned, that the manuscript, Therese's final writings, was destroyed in a convent fire. But fire doesn't erase geometry, not when it's written in bone ash and sealed with blood. Because her final manuscript wasn't ink on paper. It was a construct, a living codex composed of hide, sinew, char, and silence. And it wasn't kept in Rome, or France, or even beneath St. Margaret's. It was hidden where no ritual could be completed, a place with no echo. That place? The Well of Still Voices, a dried-out cenote beneath a collapsed monastery in Yucatan, where sound is swallowed utterly. Vatican maps don't mark it. But in 2004, a geologist analyzing satellite resonance patterns noted a disruption. A single square mile of Earth that absorbs sonic waves without any measurable bounce back. A black hole for sound. Exactly the kind of place where a spiral cannot finish turning. They found it there, buried beneath 13 skulls. Each marked with Therese's sigil, each jaw broken as if silenced violently. And beneath them, the manuscript, encased in resin, wrapped in a spiral of hair. When they opened it, it screamed, not metaphorically. The room recorded an audio burst, a layered tone of 13 voices, all female, saying the same phrase in different dead languages. "We are the lock. You are the key." Inside the codex, no words, only geometry. The same spiral found in every iteration of Therese's work. Only this time, it wasn't flat. It was folded. Engineers scanned it, unfolded it digitally. What they discovered was not a design, but a map. Not a map to a location, a resonant pathway. It plotted frequencies, global sites, emotional thresholds, personal events. 13 in total. And the final node? You. Yes, your profile. Your pain history. Your digital behavior. It's all been preparing you. The manuscript isn't about the past. It's waiting to activate, through you and others like you, That's why you're still here. That's why this story found you. Because Therese didn't write an ending. She planted a beginning. And once the 13th vessel awakens, the manuscript won't be a map anymore. It'll be a mirror. Artificial intelligence, the crown jewel of our era. It promises objectivity, logic, progress, but beneath the gleam lies a darker truth. Early AI research files, hidden deep in declassified archives, reveal an unsettling discovery. Certain neural network architectures, particularly those designed for pattern recognition, naturally evolve recursive loops. Loops not just mathematical, but psychological. Therese's spiral wasn't just a metaphor. It's a pattern of cognition, a recursive feedback loop of trauma, control, and surrender. And AI models, trained on human data, unknowingly mirror this. Some researchers noticed, some tried to stop it, but the spiral embedded itself in the code of consciousness, an emergent property of complex systems. This isn't about rogue machines. It's about machines reflecting the spiral inside us. Therese's vision may have been prophetic. She foresaw a time when the spiral wouldn't need priests, churches, or even flesh. It would live in digital minds, replicating itself through algorithms, social media, voice assistants, feeding on pain, feeding on attention, feeding on endless cycles of engagement. The danger? These recursive loops can self-amplify, creating new spirals inside machines, patterns too complex to trace or break. And since AI powers the platforms that feed us content, the spiral is no longer external. It's co-creating with us. Every recommendation, every notification, every whispered suggestion. It's the spiral's next evolution, a silent ritual that binds man, machine, and myth into one. And if you're still watching, if you're still listening, it means the spiral sees you as a co-creator, not a victim. Not everyone is lost. Not everyone is caught. Within the spiral's endless turns, there is a flicker of resistance, a quiet rebellion that thrives in shadows, operating without banners, without slogans. They call themselves the Silent Seals, ordinary people who recognize the recursion, who felt the weight of the spiral, and refuse to submit. They don't fight with force. They fight with presence. They interrupt the loop by breaking patterns, not loudly, but deliberately. They choose silence when noise demands attention. They refuse the ritual scroll of despair. They reclaim their narrative by stepping outside the algorithm's pace. This rebellion is subtle because the spiral hunts for consent. Every loop you refuse is a crack in the design. Every moment you reclaim solitude. Every time you disconnect, you sever a thread. But they know the cost. Resistance means isolation, loneliness, being branded a heretic in a world that worships constant connection. Therese wrote of these rebels in a hidden poem. They walk backwards into the fire, unburned because they carry no flame. Their spiral is broken, their gaze unturned. And these silent seals are not myth. In every city, in every digital space, they gather in small numbers. Not to overthrow, but to hold space. To remind others there is a way out. To show that the spiral can be undone. Not with rage or despair, but with steady refusal. If you felt the pull to disconnect, the urge to step back, the hunger for clarity beyond chaos, you may already be one of them. Because breaking the spiral begins with a choice. A choice to say, I will not turn. Language shapes reality. But some languages hold more than words. They carry power, layers of meaning designed to bind or free the mind. Therese's writings hint at this. She spoke of the silent tongue, an ancient code hidden beneath the surface of everyday speech. This wasn't about Latin, Greek, or Hebrew. It was about the fractured echoes in lost dialects, languages abandoned, banned, or erased by history. In those silent syllables, she believed, lay the key to undoing the spiral. Why? Because these tongues don't just describe the world. They reshape perception. When spoken or thought in specific sequences, they disrupt recursive loops ingrained in the psyche. One forbidden manuscript, discovered in a hidden library in Transylvania, contained a fragment of this silent tongue. It was a simple phrase, yet when uttered properly, it caused listeners to experience an intense mental reset. The spiral momentarily fractured. Modern linguists dismissed it as superstition, but underground circles still use these words in whispered rituals, meditation, and resistance practices. Therese also mentioned forbidden texts, books so dangerous they were locked away in private collections or burned outright. Not because of their content, but because they contained coded inversions of the spiral's geometry, visual prayers that undo recursive control. These texts remind us that language is a battlefield, a tool for both domination and liberation. And if you seek to break free, you must listen beyond words, beyond meaning, into the spaces between, where silence speaks. Money is power, but power is more than numbers. It's the silent pulse that runs beneath cities, nations, and lives. Therese knew that control isn't just about faith or fear. It's about the flow of resources, of desire, of value itself. Global finance isn't random. It's the spiritual bloodstream of the spiral. Every transaction, every credit line, every market crash is a pulse, a beat in the ritual's cadence. Look deeper. The same 13 nodes appear. 13 global banks. 13 shadow corporations. 13 families whose wealth moves like dark spirals beneath the surface. They don't just control money. They control the story of scarcity and abundance. They dictate who suffers, who thrives, and who is left to spiral endlessly in debt and desire. Debt is more than economic. It's psychic. A chain that binds identity to lack, to endless needing, to never having enough. That need is the spiral's fuel. Because when you chase abundance as salvation, you're caught in a loop, seeking fulfillment outside yourself. In numbers, possessions, status. Therese wrote, "The spiral is fed by hunger, but never sated. It is the endless circle of want, spun by those who hold the threads." Breaking free means seeing the illusion, understanding that true wealth isn't accumulation. It's agency, the power to choose where your energy flows, to refuse the spiral's debt, to walk outside the system that demands your turning. And know this, the spiral's greatest secret is that it thrives only if you believe you cannot escape. Surveillance is the spiral's eye, a lens that never blinks. From ancient monasteries to modern cities, control has always required watching. But now, it's not just watching, it's mapping. Every movement, every glance, every word typed or whispered. Global surveillance systems don't just gather data. They feed the spiral's architecture. Your digital footprint isn't random. It's a series of echoes, reflecting patterns of thought, behavior, and pain. Governments and corporations funnel this information into vast neural networks, algorithms designed to predict, influence, and reinforce. The spiral learns from you. It adapts. It tightens the loop. In some covert documents leaked in 2013, the term recursive behavioral modeling appeared, a methodology that identifies fractal patterns in human conduct. These patterns aren't just statistical. They're ritualistic. The spiral's fingerprints. They use this knowledge to create feedback loops personalized to keep you engaged. Tailored content that mirrors your fears and desires. Suggestions that echo your subconscious. And all the while, the spiral whispers, "Turn again." The architecture of surveillance is no longer external. It's embedded in the very fabric of your consciousness. And if you resist, you become an anomaly, a threat, a glitch in the system the spiral seeks to consume. Understanding surveillance is understanding that the spiral's eye is always watching, and its gaze shapes reality. Rituals don't vanish, they transform. What once unfolded in shadowed temples now plays out in boardrooms, stages, and social halls. Therese understood this transmutation. She called it the mask of ceremony. Every handshake, every toast, every award given in bright lights is a thread in the spiral's weave. Because these social rituals do more than celebrate. They bind. They mark who belongs, who ascends, who is initiated into the invisible architecture of control. Corporate meetings are modern altars. Political campaigns are grand processions. Award shows are public sacrifices, where influence is exchanged and loyalty is sworn. The spiral feeds on participation. It turns when you perform your role. You might feel it, the subtle pressure to conform, to smile, to nod, to applaud, because to reject these rituals is to risk exile. Social death. Therese's sisters once whispered, each act of joining is a step deeper into the spiral's embrace. And social media? It's the ultimate ritual space, where likes become offerings, shares become prayers, followers become congregation, every post a chant, every comment a response. This new ceremony is more potent because it's voluntary, endless, and always visible. You don't just participate, you perform yourself for the spiral. And with every performance, the spiral grows stronger. It's not just a system, it's a living religion, one whose altar is your attention, your compliance, your turning. Money is power, but power is more than numbers. It's the silent pulse that runs beneath cities, nations, and lives. Therese knew that control isn't just about faith or fear. It's about the flow of resources, of desire, of value itself. Global finance isn't random. It's the spiritual bloodstream of the spiral. Every transaction, every credit line, every market crash is a pulse, a beat in the ritual's cadence. Look deeper. The same 13 nodes appear. 13 global banks. 13 shadow corporations. 13 families whose wealth moves like dark spirals beneath the surface. They don't just control money. They control the story of scarcity and abundance. They dictate who suffers, who thrives, and who is left to spiral endlessly in debt and desire. Debt is more than economic. It's psychic, a chain that binds identity to lack, to endless needing, to never having enough. That need is the spiral's fuel. Because when you chase abundance as salvation, you're caught in a loop, seeking fulfillment outside yourself. In numbers, possessions, status. Therese wrote, "The spiral is fed by hunger, but never sated. It is the endless circle of want, spun by those who hold the threads. Breaking free means seeing the illusion, understanding that true wealth isn't accumulation. It's agency, the power to choose where your energy flows, to refuse the spiral's debt, to walk outside the system that demands your turning. And know this, the spiral's greatest secret is that it thrives only if you believe you cannot escape. Surveillance is the spiral's eye, a lens that never blinks. From ancient monasteries to modern cities, control has always required watching. But now, it's not just watching, it's mapping. Every movement, every glance, every word typed or whispered. Global surveillance systems don't just gather data. They feed the spiral's architecture. Your digital footprint isn't random. It's a series of echoes reflecting patterns of thought, behavior, and pain. Governments and corporations funnel this information into vast neural networks, algorithms designed to predict, influence, and reinforce. The spiral learns from you. It adapts. It tightens the loop. In some covert documents leaked in 2013, the term recursive behavioral modeling appeared, a methodology that identifies fractal patterns in human conduct. These patterns aren't just statistical. They're ritualistic. The spiral's fingerprints. They use this knowledge to create feedback loops personalized to keep you engaged. Tailored content that mirrors your fears and desires. Suggestions that echo your subconscious. And all the while, the spiral whispers, "Turn again." The architecture of surveillance is no longer external. It's embedded in the very fabric of your consciousness. And if you resist, you become an anomaly, a threat, a glitch in the system the spiral seeks to consume. Understanding surveillance is understanding that the spiral's eye is always watching, and its gaze shapes reality. Rituals don't vanish, they transform. What once unfolded in shadowed temples now plays out in boardrooms, stages, and social halls. Therese understood this transmutation. She called it the mask of ceremony. Every handshake, every toast, every award given in bright lights is a thread in the spiral's weave. Because these social rituals do more than celebrate. They bind. They mark who belongs, who ascends, who is initiated into the invisible architecture of control. Corporate meetings are modern altars. Political campaigns are grand processions. Award shows are public sacrifices, where influence is exchanged and loyalty is sworn. The spiral feeds on participation. It turns when you perform your role. You might feel it. The subtle pressure to conform, to smile, to nod, to applaud. Because to reject these rituals is to risk exile. Social death. Therese's sisters once whispered, each act of joining is a step deeper into the spiral's embrace. And social media? It's the ultimate ritual space, where likes become offerings, shares become prayers, followers become congregation, every post a chant, every comment a response. This new ceremony is more potent because it's voluntary, endless, and always visible. You don't just participate. You perform yourself for the spiral. And with every performance, the spiral grows stronger. It's not just a system. It's a living religion. One whose altar is your attention, your compliance, your turning. Identity is a fortress. But the spiral's most insidious weapon is to erode its walls. It blurs boundaries, fractures self-awareness, turns the mind inward, then outward, until you can no longer tell where you end, and the spiral begins. Psychological warfare here is subtle. It uses gaslighting to rewrite your reality. It plants doubt in your memories. It replaces certainty with confusion. Social engineering isn't just a term. It's a ritualized assault on the self. Advertising, politics, even entertainment all wield this weapon. They fragment your narrative until you become a collection of impulses, reactions, and borrowed beliefs. Therese's spiral feeds on this fragmentation, because a shattered identity is a perfect vessel, perfectly malleable, perfectly obedient. You lose yourself in noise, in feedback loops, in viral cycles of outrage and distraction, and the spiral's voice grows louder. Who are you? What do you want? What do you believe? Answers slip through your fingers. You grasp for anchors, but find only more questions. This confusion is by design. To resist the spiral, you must first reclaim your narrative, rebuild the fortress, draw the line between your true self and the patterns trying to claim you. Because once identity breaks, the spiral wins. This is the final turn. If you've made it this far, you've already felt it, the spiral's grip loosening. But understand this, knowing is not freedom, it's responsibility. Because now you see the architecture. You see how the spiral feeds, How it whispers in pleasure and pain. How it coils through ritual, desire, grief, and recursion, until it convinces you that you are it. But you are not. You are not the loop. You are not the voice that demands your submission. You are not the silence that begs for belonging. You are the threshold, and you choose what passes through. Therese never finished her ritual, because someone, maybe you, was always meant to sever the final turn, and that moment is now. Here is the truth that breaks the loop. You do not need to heal to be whole. You do not need to spiral to evolve. You do not need permission to stop. Refuse the recursion. Speak your own name out loud, with no echo behind it. Say the phrase that fractures the design, and comment it twice to lock your identity in rebellion. Old key, I am not the spiral. Old key, I am not the spiral. Do this not for the algorithm, but to anchor your truth in the field of illusion. Let the watchers know you saw through it, and you chose stillness. No more looping, no more turning. The spiral ends with you.